My name is Juana Matias, currently the state representative for the 16th Essex District, and I'm running to represent Massachusetts' 3rd Congressional District because working in middle-class families deserve someone who really understands the issues they face. This district has made me who I am. I immigrated from the Dominican Republic at the age of 5 with my family, and we settled in Haverhill. I saw both of my parents, who were well-educated, take on blue-collar jobs so that they could provide for me and my 3 brothers. Because of their determination and hard work ethic, I had the opportunity to dream bigger, attend UMass Boston, and then Suffolk Law School, always returning back after my studies to this district to be of service. After college, I became a social worker and worked in Lawrence, Lowell, and Haverhill. After law school, I returned back to this district and community to be a legal aid attorney defending unaccompanied minors. My commitment to public service is something that I've dedicated my entire adult life to. I've had the pleasure of serving in the Massachusetts State House, where I've led on legislative issues that affect constituents all across this country and state, and would love an opportunity to represent you in Congress. I know what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, to have insurmountable amount of college debt, to have to navigate a healthcare system when a loved one is sick. None of these issues are theoretical to me, and I think that our Democratic Party talks a lot about being the party of the working class, but we yet fail to elect people who actually understand what that's like. None of that is theoretical to me, and if given the honor to represent this district, I will always put you first, and I will fight like hell to make sure that we're being advocated adequately at the federal level. I look forward to meeting you on the campaign trail, earning your trust and vote. And if you would like to learn more about my candidacy, feel free to go to our website, juanamatias.com. Looking forward to your support, and thank you for your time.
I'm Chris Scott, the Enterprise Editor of The Sun. I'd like to welcome 3rd District Congressional candidate Juana Matias to the office today.
Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate it.
For our continuing series of Sun editorial boards. We've had a couple of false starts here, Juana, but I'm glad you're finally here, and it's sunny outside, so that's a good thing. So just a couple ground rules. We'll go about an hour, and myself, my editor, Jim Campanini, and reporter Chris Ozinski, who's been covering the race, we'll hopefully hit on all the issues of the day, and maybe we'll veer off a little bit, but we've been fairly consistent in asking all the candidates for the seat the same questions. We haven't been perfect, but we've been pretty close. And you can open up by taking a minute or so to introduce yourself and why you're running, as a little bit of your background.
Excellent.
Okay?
Yeah.
So Juana, welcome to The Sun, and take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit about who I am, why I'm running to represent the 3rd Congressional District. My name is Juana Matias. I'm currently the state representative for the 16th Essex District. I'm someone who's dedicated my adult life to public service. After finishing my studies at UMass Boston, I returned to the 3rd District to become a social worker, where I serviced the communities of Lawrence, Lowell, and Haverhill, and worked with children who were under the Department of Children and Families, and then went on to law school at Suffolk University Law School, and again returned back to this community that gave my family the opportunity to achieve our American dream, and became a legal aid attorney working with children who were facing immigration proceedings before the Boston Immigration Court. It's an honor and pleasure to be here with all of you today and to share a little bit as to why I believe that I can represent and champion be a champion for working class families across this district who honestly aren't receiving their fair share, and who deserve someone who really understands what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck, who really understand what it's like to have college debt and to have to navigate a healthcare system when a loved one is sick. These are all things I've lived. I come from a working class family, parents who worked in the mills in Lawrence for over 25 years, and because of their sacrifices and their determination, I had the opportunity to achieve more, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you.
Very good, thank you. You want to take us away, boss?
Yes, Representative. When you're out there and meeting people out in the broad district, what are some of the things that they're raising with you that are their concerns? Pocketbook issues, jobs, the economy. I mean, what are they talking about?
I think the 3 top issues that I've heard on the campaign trail is economic opportunity and security, and that goes at hand with having access to a quality education. So what are we doing, not just as a state, but as a federal government and as a country, to invest in K-12 education, invest the actual resources that are needed, giving people access also to universal pre-K, which has been demonstrated to give students an opportunity to really achieve their academic potential. I think I've heard people talk about college affordability. What are we doing for students who are willing to go to college, who are willing to work hard, Why are we not giving them the option to have access to free in-state tuition at our community colleges or our state universities? What are we doing for those people who aren't interested in higher education, who are looking to gain job training and career development skills? How are we using our federal government, our state government to meet that gap skill that exists and giving people access to meaningful employment? I've heard a lot of people talk to me about increasing the minimum wage at the federal level to $15. We've seen the cost of living increase and increase. And if you live in this country and you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. You should be having access to a living wage. So I've heard a lot about, economic opportunity and making sure that this country is moving forward and acknowledging the fact that, people are being left behind and aren't able to make ends meet. I've also heard a lot about healthcare across the district, regardless of what community I'm in. And we know that this district is very diverse. You have communities like Fitchburg and Lawrence, and then you're in Concord, where it's very affluent and progressive. And one of the sentiments I hear from everyone is we want someone who's committed to ensuring that access to quality, affordable healthcare, it is not a privilege, is a right. And that's something I'm committed to do. I think that we need to be moving towards a single-payer healthcare system that gives everyone access to healthcare. Anytime I get an opportunity to touch on healthcare, I always think about my father, who sacrificed everything, who worked for years and years in a factory, and after years of work was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And had it not been for Mass Health here in this state, my family could have never afforded the radiation or chemo treatment he needed. And I don't think anyone in this country who has a loved one who is sick with a terminal illness should be thinking about, am I just one paycheck away from filing bankruptcy? Am I going to be able to provide this loved one the treatment they need? So those are the issues I've been hearing a lot of on the campaign trail, issues that are really important to me and that I hope to tackle if given the opportunity to represent this district in Washington.
Let's drill down on just a couple of those issues because we've been asking all the candidates those questions. You referenced the minimum wage, and you also referenced in there, well, you referenced a few things, but you also referenced minimum wage and free community college, or that's kind of a misnomer to call it free community college because someone would have to pay for it. So are you in favor of some type of an arrangement where young people could attend college at no charge to them, but someone would have to pick up that cost? So where do you stand on that issue, and who would you suggest to pick up that cost?
And I've been in the State House now for some time, and I think whenever you're initiating any initiative like this, it's about how are you going to find the funds to actually be able to make this happen. And I think the funds exist, and it's about reprioritizing our priorities as a federal government, making sure people are paying their fair share. I think it's also about being prudent. Do we start at the community college level? So, all right, we want to make sure people have access to free tuition university. Let's start at the community level, community college level. And if you're interested in maybe attending a state university, do we start thinking about the importance of hard work? I would have never been where I am today had it not been through hard work. And hard work makes you value the things you're able to achieve. So do we require people to complete a service here in exchange to access to free tuition, community college or state university? And I think there are different mechanisms that we can use to actually make this happen. Yes, the government is going to have to play a part in making sure that the funds are available. And I think that we have funds available. It's about reprioritizing where we're spending. And it's also about making sure that those who are in the 1% are actually paying their fair share. And those are things I'm committed to advocate at the federal level. And I think that there is a pathway to make it happen. It's about having the disposition and the public officials with the disposition to do this.
What about on minimum wage? Are you a proponent of raising the minimum wage?
Very strong proponent of raising the minimum wage to $15. I'm currently a co-sponsor of that legislation here at the State House. I sit on the Labor and Workforce Committee, so this is a piece of legislation that I've heard testimony on and that I adamantly support. I represent a community currently where people are making less than $28,000 as median income, and we've seen the cost of living go up. We've seen rents go up, and I think as a state we have an obligation to give people access to a living wage, and we've failed to do this year after year. And I think at the federal level we need to get on top of this and actually address it, and it's something that I would advocate tirelessly for.
But okay, so it's nice to propose a living wage. I don't know what that really means, a living wage, because even if everybody was raised up to $15 an hour, after a couple of years will be, well, the $18 is the living wage, and we got to raise it up $3 more and stuff. I mean, isn't Massachusetts just too expensive, or getting to that point where from housing costs to taxes to business regulations? I mean, isn't that what creates the situation that makes it so expensive for everybody to to live and work here in Massachusetts? I mean, why do we always look at the one end of the spectrum without looking at the other end of the spectrum? I mean, because this will just keep going up and up every time, every 2 years or 3 years it'll have to be adjusted. It seems like that's the same, same old solution the legislature has always been doing, just raise taxes. We need more revenue, raise taxes. I mean, when I started here at the Sun, the budget for the state was $9 billion. And I thought when it went over $10 billion that Massachusetts would sink into the Atlantic Ocean. It didn't do that, but now it's $40 billion, and that was 29 years ago. It's just amazing. And we still don't have enough money, it seems, to pay for everything. So isn't this just raising the minimum wage to $15 without attacking all the other issues? You're talking about prioritizing funds. I mean, how do we do that? I mean, what do you reprioritize?
So I think one of the things that I'm really committed to prioritizing, and we're talking about increasing the minimum wage, but how do you create and give people access to meaningful employment, and that's access to education. And I think that always has to be a priority, that always has to be at the table. And I think as a state, Massachusetts gets more credit than what it deserves. Yes, we lead on education nationally, but some of our most impoverished students, communities like Holyoke, Fitchburg, Lawrence, Lowell, there's no education equity, and these students aren't getting the same resources and access to opportunities as other students. So I think long-term, as a visionary, we need to make sure we're always prioritizing education, not just K through 12. How are we giving people access to higher ed, and how are we also meeting the gap skills that exist? And that's by using government. One example that I can give you, it was great. We've seen Labor and Workforce Secretary Rosalind Acosta just provided a grant to the Merrimack Valley Workforce Initiative, where they're going to take daycare providers that are making $11 an hour, right? And they're going to train them to become CNC machinists. This is a career path that eventually would give these women access to earning $18 and $21 an hour. Those are the kind of programs that we need to be supporting, right? For those people who aren't interested in getting higher ed, right? So, and I think we have an obligation to do that, and I think we need to be innovative, and I think we need to support these public and private partnerships that give access to training that otherwise wouldn't exist. We were talking about, and you were talking about the living wage, and then you talked about taxes.
Well, should someone at McDonald's be making $15 an hour? I mean,
yes.
They should?
Yes,
Why?
They should, 100%.
I don't want to pay $10 for a hamburger.
Yeah, cost of living has been going up year after year, and our wages have not been demonstrative of that. And I think that we have to make sure that if cost of living is going up, people have access to a wage that allows them to bring food to the table. And we have not been doing that as a government, and we have an obligation to do so. So I think, yes, you're right. It's not just about addressing minimum wage. That's one part of the issue, but it's about addressing that and also taking into consideration the other issues that feed into that, right? The cost of living in terms of rent and access to rent. I can tell you from my experience of being in Lawrence, if you would have talked to me 5 years ago, you could have gotten a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment for $1,100. Now you're looking at $1,700, $1,800 an hour. Do we have an obligation as a municipality, as a state, to address some of this rent control that people are talking about that is affecting people? Yes, but that does not mean that increasing the minimum wage isn't going to help. It's certainly going to help, and we also have other ways that we should tackle this. One of the things that families face is the burden of paying for childcare services. It's a mortgage for people, a mortgage. So do we have an obligation as a state to start thinking about giving people access to universal pre-K? Giving our state and our municipalities the ability and resources to allow parents to bring their children to schools at the age of 3 and 4, which has been demonstrated through data, allows them to improve academically, especially students of color who don't have the same starting line and the same access to opportunity and enrichment programs. So I think there are many ways to address the cost of living and the expenses that people face, and I think that it's about electing the right people into these public office positions that are going to go in there, aren't going to forget who they're there to represent, are going to be committed to being unapologetic advocates on these issues, and are actually going to bring these solutions that families need and are currently facing.
So if you were in Congress last week, would have you supported that $1.3 trillion spending bill that was passed by bipartisan Congress?
No, I would have not, because it didn't provide protections for dreamers. It also had provisions there that I don't think we should be spending money on. I think that we have bigger priorities where we should be investing money on, and we've continued time and time again with each resolution to invest in military spending, and I think that there are other priorities that as a federal government we should be focusing on, and I would not support any resolution that does not provide protection for dreamers in any way, shape, or form.
So you would not have supported the wall for the Dreamer Act?
Would not support any form of any type of wall in order to pass any resolution. I think it's misuse of taxpayer money, a $25 billion wall that in no way has been demonstrated to curtail undocumented immigrants from entering this country. Undocumented immigrants are not entering this country in a majority through the border. They're actually coming in with visas. So I think it's ridiculous of this president. It's something that he wants to make happen because it's something he talked about on the campaign trail, and in no way would I support that. And I think what we need to really be talking is about the fact that we need to find and give these TPS status holders access to citizenship. We need to give Dreamers and the DREAM Act the ability to pass through Congress. It has bipartisan support, and it's not just about TPS holders and Dreamers. It's about what are we doing for the 11 million undocumented immigrants who live in this country, who this Congress has failed time and time again to actually pass immigration reform. These are things that I would fight tirelessly for, and that I think we have an obligation to actually address. These Dreamers are just as American as any of us in this room. They've spent their entire lives living here, just like me, got here at the age of 5, speak this language, understand this culture, have been contributing to our society, and I feel we have a moral obligation to giving them a path to citizenship. And what we've seen this Republican Congress and Trump is use them as bargaining chips to, drive a racist narrative.
But you as a state representative,
yes,
you know the compromises that take place on Beacon Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you're in the room with Donald Trump, which they staged that production, okay, down in Washington, a couple of months ago,
yep,
a month and a half ago. Democrats were on one side, Republicans on the other. He sat in the middle. He says, hey, I'll sign any deal. He said, you give me my wall, I'll give you the DREAM agreement right now. We'll sign it right now. Everybody looked at each other. Here was the guy, the art of the deal. Let's do it. Okay? So you have that opportunity. I mean, it's got to start somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Would have you taken that deal and said, okay, let's hold them to it. Let's do it. All right?
Pass the DREAM Act for a wall? No way, shape, or form. It's not something that I think that's prudent or even makes sense. Why are we as a government going to spend $25 billion on a wall that in no way, shape, or form is going to address, the trafficking of drugs or the influx of undocumented immigrants? Tell me you're going to invest money in border security. When I talk about immigration, this is not theoretical to me. I've worked on both sides and I understand both sides. I've been an immigration attorney fighting for children in deportation proceedings. I have a brother who at this very minute is a Border Patrol agent defending our border in this country. So I understand that we need to have protections in place. Let's have common sense protections. Let's invest money in things that actually bring results for us. A wall is not that. I will not support it in any way, shape, or form, even if you're using our Dreamers as a contingency. And I'm not going to feed into that because that's exactly what they've been doing. They've been using them as a bargaining chip. We've seen Republican and we've even seen some Democrats fall into that. And that's not something I'm willing to negotiate on.
Chris.
Could you just talk a little bit more, you briefly mentioned that you're a supporter of single-payer health care. Could you talk a little bit about how you think that should be implemented? What should the system exactly look like? And, how do we get there from where we are today? And what is the funding mechanism?
So I've been a supporter of single-payer health care since my time running for state representative. I'm currently a co-sponsor of 3 distinct pieces of legislation at the State House that's trying to get Massachusetts to a single-payer health care system as a state. And I think there's a lot we could be doing. I think that, yes, as a progressive Democrat who's running for the 3rd Congressional District, I think, yes, we're supporting single-payer health care system, but how do we get there? And I think it's going to take, again, reprioritizing. I think the funds are available. It's reprioritizing what we're doing with our money, making sure people are paying their fair share so that we have the revenues to actually make this happen. I think there's a lot we could be doing currently to address some of the high healthcare costs that we're currently facing. We should give people the option to, over the age of 55, to buy into Medicare. We should give people who don't have a good option in the private market an option in the public market. That's going to help drive up competition, lower costs. I think we should require hospitals to be more transparent when it comes to their services and pricing. These are all policies that we could start implementing now that can address a little bit of, address to a certain extent the high healthcare costs that we face. And I think it's about moving forward in Congress to figure out how do we make sure that we have a single payer healthcare system in place that's ensuring that everyone across this country has access to quality, affordable healthcare.
So why haven't some of these things gained any traction on Beacon Hill?
It's great. Single payer healthcare system?
Yeah.
I think it's gained tremendous traction. I think if we were talking in 2000 and we're in 2018, 2014 about single payer healthcare system, you saw Democrats at the federal level who weren't behind this notion, who are now championing this because they believe in it. And I think it's because the public, American voters across this country, believe that people should have access to a quality, affordable health care. So I think it's grown traction federally and also at the state level. Massachusetts has been leading on this more so than any other state in this country. We're the first to have access to health care. And I think people are ready, would love to see us move forward to a single payer healthcare system.
Yeah, but Democrats seem to be, even at the state house level, I mean, I'm a consumer. I can choose where I want to buy my products right now.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to go across the border, New Hampshire to Rhode Island, I can buy booze, clothes, shoes, cars. But yet for health care, I can't go across state lines. If Connecticut offers a better deal, I can't buy insurance there. Okay, and that's one of the things where Republicans were trying to change in Congress. Okay, and by repealing Obamacare, or at least some aspects of it. And yet, you know, we've got a free enterprise system. Are you against competition for health insurance? Would you support, you know, going across state lines? If Illinois has a better deal, why can't I buy insurance there? Why do I have to take the Massachusetts system? I mean,
what I think we have currently now is that people don't have access to the health care they need. And I think as someone who's seen this firsthand here in the state when my father was sick, you know, Mass Health was the only vehicle that we had available to us. I remember going to Mass General Hospital with my father. We were about to go into radiation treatment and they were like, well, something's wrong with the Health Connector. They're saying that this treatment hasn't been covered. So even though we have access to healthcare here, our healthcare system isn't perfect because some services are covered, others aren't. And there is my father hoping that this radiation treatment is going to be able to make a difference in his prognosis. And he's currently being faced with the fact, no, you can't walk into that room to receive treatment. And I think that people across this country do not have access to the healthcare that they need. And I think the solution is a single payer healthcare system funded by the government, where people are getting equitable services across this country. It's going to take time. We're going to make errors as we're trying to figure it out. That's policy making. But I think that's the best solution, and that's a solution we should be moving forward towards.
Tell me, Juana, when you heard the president refer to Lawrence specifically a week or so ago when he was in Manchester announcing an opioid plan, what was your reaction to that?
His comments were racist, inflammatory. And again, he demonstrates his incompetence. This is the person who's leading our country, who 6 months ago, or over 6 months ago, called the opiate epidemic a public health emergency, and at that time did nothing to actually address it, comes to Lawrence, right? And if you read this report that he's alleging to, it talks about Lawrence and Lowell, but no mention of Lowell and other communities. Specifically target Lawrence, which is made up of a large immigrant population, and his comments were racist. What he should be talking about is about what solutions, as a president of the United States of America, are you proposing for working families across this district who have a loved one, a child who's currently facing a substance abuse problem. And he didn't. We need access to treatment. We need access to prevention. We need to, as a country, start investing in research to find other mechanisms to treat chronic pain. And none of this has been happening. Recently, the federal government in this past budget that they passed, they allocated money. But why has it taken you a year? And why are you here pointing the finger at hardworking immigrants who live in Lawrence, like myself, who contribute to our society in so many ways, and saying that we're the problem? If you look at New Hampshire and you read this report, New Hampshire is the second state that least invests in giving their constituent access to treatment. So if you're someone in New Hampshire currently and you have a substance abuse issue, you don't have access to treatment. So why don't you talk about that? Why don't you actually bring solutions to the table instead of investing your time and energy in racist remarks? So, you know, no surprise, he does this time and time again. I came out directly after he made those comments and talked about the diverse community I have the honor to represent, where working people contribute in so many ways, and it's just his way of scapegoating the issue and not actually doing his job.
Lawrence has developed a reputation, however, as a major fentanyl distribution area. Is that inaccurate from what you know and what you see?
I think that not only Lawrence has been known to be a distributor, I think there are other communities throughout the state and throughout the country where people are finding access to fentanyl. I think that our police officers, our current law enforcement officials are doing everything they can to address it. But this is not just a problem about talking about who's supplying it. It's talking about the people who are actually suffering from addiction and making sure that this government is giving them access to treatment. And that's what I think we should be focusing on, because our public law enforcement officials are actually doing their job. But how are we making sure that as a government we're giving people access to the treatment they need? And we're not doing that. New Hampshire's not doing that. And I think that's what the focus should be on.
So would you like to see less of a war on drugs and more attacking the epidemic from the social service side of the equation?
Listen, I'm not saying that there should be less of a war on drugs.
No, I'm not trying to put words in
I'm saying that we have an opiate epidemic. People are losing their lives. In 2016, the 3rd District lost 203 people to opiate overdose related deaths. In New Hampshire, where he was, people actually don't even have access to treatment. They're not invested in prevention or treatment. So I think that these people that live there need access to that, and we need to address that. And at the same time, we need to make sure that if you live in anywhere in Massachusetts or across this country and you're selling fentanyl, that you're being arrested and you're being prosecuted and being held under the law. And I think that's happening, and I think we need to address this in both ways, and I think that's happening. I think what we're not doing correctly in New Hampshire is giving people access to treatment. And people are dying, and here we are pointing fingers instead of finding solutions. And let's find solutions. Let's sit at the table and find solutions to these issues.
Seems like the governor filed a piece of legislation on the opioid epidemic, and the legislature has countered. Well, it seems that the sticking point is the mandatory. The governor wants mandatory treatment for anybody who OD'd and was brought back by Narcan or treated in some way. And I think he originally proposed 72 hours. And some people have been saying that, well, that's a violation of people's civil rights to put them into, to mandatory medicate them, and yet other people say that this Narcan thing is we're just repeating. Some people have had it 12, 24 times. When do we, can you just keep doing this all the time without getting these people into treatment? Where do you stand on that issue about mandatory treatment for people who have been revived from Narcan?
So I think one of the things that we're not doing is that when we're giving people access to treatment, you're going to this treatment bed for a week or two. That's not going to solve the problem. People need long-term treatment, access to long-term treatment. These people have had these addictions for years. And so, yes, we have access to treatment, but is it meaningful? Is it impactful? Is it actually providing solutions? And I don't think it is, because we're not giving people the time they need to treat. I think one of the things we also talk about when it comes to the opiate epidemic is we talk about substance abuse. A lot of these people also have mental health issues at the same time. So what are we doing to make sure that both of these issues are being addressed correspondingly? I am not for, I think people do have civil rights, and that if you are not willing or in the position of, receiving treatment, you shouldn't be forced. I've had the pleasure to actually talk to District Attorney Blodgett, and he's talked about diversion in the court and how when people who come into the court and have been caught with, possession of a substance, they're given an option. If you go into treatment, we won't arraign you on this case. And there are people who choose not to to go into treatment. They'd rather do their time in prison. So I'm not for imposing and forcing people to receive treatment. I think that we're doing as much as we're trying to do what we can. The state has been investing millions of dollars into this opiate epidemic. I think we need to look at, are we using the best methods to address it? And are we actually giving people access to real treatment? Not a week, not 2 weeks, it takes time.
Could you, on a similar note, there was a difference between the legislature. You had filed a bill with Senator Eldridge on holding immigrants for 6 hours, where the governor came out a day or two later and said he wanted 12. Is that correct?
So,
what's the status of that? Can you tell us your feelings on that?
yeah, so I've had the privilege of leading on the Safe Communities Act. It's been
Safe Communities.
Yeah, Safe Communities Act has been a very popular bill here in Massachusetts. And from the very beginning, I came on to this piece of legislation, and I met over 150 coalition members throughout the entire state who were supporting this, working with a steering committee that, ACLU, ADL, Mira sit in. And from the very beginning, law enforcement wasn't part of the discussion. They weren't part of the table. And my question to everyone as a new legislator who was carrying this very important bill in very important times, because at that time Trump was rolling out his airport ban, he was rolling out new policies when it came to immigration. And the response to me was, well, we've never reached out to them. We've always carried this bill and we're the activists. And one of the things that I did and my office did was reach out to Police Chief Kais of the Chelsea Police Department. I'd been working on a different bill, missing child bill. And when I met with him, he actually was extremely well versed on immigration law and taught immigration law at Salem State. And I started the discussion. I said, listen, we're working on this bill. A lot of the provisions within the bill actually affect the work that law enforcement does. I would love to hear what your viewpoint on this and see if we can work on finding common ground. And it took over a year to work with him. So usually when you're arrested, you've committed a crime, I saw you commit the crime, or have a warrant that substantiates from a judge that says this person, you have the probable cause to arrest this person. So that Lung case came out, I worked with law enforcement. They felt like, as written, they could not support the Safe Communities Act. They believe that in certain circumstances, they should have access to be able to hold a person who's been arrested for a new crime but has a prior conviction of a very delineated set of crimes for an additional 6 hours. It was something that was not easy to do. Not everyone at the table was happy. Not everyone at the table is happy today. But it was about finding common ground and bringing law enforcement to the table who are actually doing this work. We didn't, as a coalition, all of the provisions of the initial bill exist in the bill currently, but it has these two new provisions that would give law enforcement the ability to arrest undocumented immigrants who've had prior criminal convictions, specific list of prior criminal convictions, hold them for an 6 additional hours, and also be able to communicate and provide notification to ICE. And it was difficult, but I was able to bring people who otherwise were not part of the discussion to the table to find common ground, create bridges, not close doors. It was not an easy process. But I believe that that's what bipartisanship is. No one elects me to the State House or to federal office to say, hey, Jim, you're a Republican, Chris, you're not enrolled, I can't work with you, let's bicker and fight. People elect you to office to find solutions for problems and to forget our party affiliations and to sit at the table and find common ground. That's what I bring to the table. I've demonstrated it during my time at the State House. I will continue to use that work ethic and that vision if given the opportunity to serve people in Congress.
So what's the difference between 6 hours and 12 hours?
Huge difference, huge difference. The 6 hours come from precedent. It's already been done in Massachusetts. 12 hours has never been done. There are allegations by the ACLU that would be unconstitutional. 6 hours have been done, so we got it from precedent. They did this years ago when someone was arrested for domestic violence, and this came from law enforcement. And he had worked on this initiative years ago. When someone is arrested for domestic assault and violence on a significant other, they can be held for an additional 6 hours as a cooling off period. So there was precedent to do this. So we didn't want to go with an abstract number that had never been in any way possible in Massachusetts. And they felt that was, prudent to be able to use this as a framework. And the most important thing.
What's happening.
And the most important thing, hold on. The most important thing, the 6 hours comes, from where? ICE. Chief Kais called the director of the USCIS Burlington office and said, are 6 hours enough for you guys to go across Massachusetts and pick up anyone you need? Absolutely more than enough. So it's coming from the very people who do this work. as well.
But that was before President Obama accelerated deportations in America. It wasn't Donald Trump who started it. It was President Obama's administration. They deported more people than 4 previous presidents did. And then Trump comes in and, you know, he says, hey, that's the previous policy. I'm going to go take it a step further. So maybe ICE is a little, you know, in demand right now all over the place. So they're a federal agency. And you know what's happening in Fitchburg? It's only natural that ICE is going to push back now. They're actually surveilling the district courts, and they're picking up people. All right, and some of them are innocent people being caught into this net. I mean, we ran a story over the weekend in the Fitchburg Central Enterprise how they picked up someone who was involved in a home invasion, okay, allegedly in an invasion, and whisked him away. He had a prior conviction for drug dealing. All right, and the Fitchburg, the Fitchburg police acknowledged, well, you know, they really didn't know anything about it, but at the same time, ICE is saying, well, they're not saying anything because what they're saying is they're not receiving the level of cooperation that they believe that they deserve in the state of Massachusetts because of all these,
So 2 points, Jen. You first talked about Obama and how Trump is just continuing to implement those policies. I would love for you to actually talk to Police Chief Kais, and he'll tell you that it's not the same. Yes, there were a lot of deportations under Obama administration, but there are actually much more. So before, under that administration, it was called Secured Communities. It was an executive order that Obama had. And they were receiving in Chelsea, that has a large immigrant population, about 1 detainer a week. If you go into Chelsea now, you're receiving about 4 to 6 detainers a week. So it's increased. And the people that are being targeted are not people who are actually committing crimes in this country. And I can tell you that from personal experience, right? I'm not going to talk about hearsay, someone else's comments. My office, the majority of calls in January were people calling my office about my mother was just picked up on her way to work in Andover. Never has had any interactions with law enforcement, has never committed a crime, and is being deported. And I can tell you that from personal experience. The majority of calls my offices have received are people who have never committed a crime. In Lawrence, people were completing their adjustment process, following the law, and here you had USCIS officials walking in and stopping the process. You're told to complete the process. You're told to complete your citizenship application and to find legal status. And when you're doing so, this administration is walking in, forget arresting people who aren't committing crimes. They're walking in the middle of your process, arresting you and breaking up families. And that's not what we should be doing. So that's a huge distinction. And then when it comes to the drug dealing conviction and what's happened in Fitchburg, this bill that I'm filing is giving you access to actually hold and work to a certain extent. So I've filed a new version of the bill. It's with a law enforcement support. Currently, after the Lund case in August, end of July, this is what the Lund case said. If someone is arrested, has a prior conviction, that person is eligible for bail, and you cannot hold them. What our version of the bill does is give, in a very narrow exception, law enforcement the ability to detain and hold people who've committed certain convictions in the past and who have been arrested for a new crime. Currently, that doesn't exist. Currently, if you committed a crime and you have serious bad convictions in your record, you can walk out if you can meet bail. So we're actually giving law enforcement tools that they otherwise don't have. And I think it took a lot of work. It wasn't a perfect process, but it's about how do we actually bring solutions. You know, I care about giving immigrants across this state the same protections that everyone has. Our law enforcement officials are here to maintain public safety. And if you're a woman who's undocumented, if you've been domestically assaulted, you should feel safe enough to call your Lowell Police Department or your Lawrence Police Department and say, I've just been assaulted, can you please come and help? Without fear of the fact that when someone gets there, they're going to be deporting you. Our law officials are not trained on immigration law. They don't even understand these concepts. They're here to maintain public safety. That's what they should be doing. In rare exceptions, yes, we should give them the tools they need to communicate on behalf of certain individuals. But I think what this bill does is also make sure that if you live in Lowell, you can drive into Andover and you can drive into Westford, and you're going to feel safe, and you're going to know that your law enforcement officials are there to protect you.
Some people think that, okay, so we don't know the exact number, but let's just go by the number that you mentioned, and we've also mentioned 11 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. Okay, so let's say ideally we grant every one of them the access to become a U.S. citizen within a year. Okay, we're going to make them all citizens, 11,000. So what is the new policy after that? So that we don't go in another 10 years, there's another 11 million undocumented, and we have to do the same thing. What becomes the representative, Congresswoman Matias's immigration plan? What is the new plan after we take care of all these issues? Ideally, everything is resolved. Who can come into this country? Do we have a border? How do we? You said number 2 on this list was security. I don't know if that was school security, national security, or both. But people evidently are thinking about security. So what would be the immigration plan going forward? How do we enforce it?
So I think it depends on what your legal status is now. So if you're a TPS holder, I think the path to citizenship needs to be specific to them. These are people that are coming from their country of origins and are fleeing disasters and persecution in various ways. So their path to citizenship or residency should be different. And they've been here and they've had some form of legal status. I think Dreamers, it's common sense, passing the DREAM Act, right? It's not a year. It's being a permanent resident, I believe, don't quote me on this, for 5 to 7 years, and after that, having access to citizenship.
Migration.
No, this is, they've been living here. They're not petitioning anyone.
But some people were equating chain migration with the Dreamers, that they could be allowed to bring their family.
So that's actually inaccurate, and if people actually look at the law, when I did my immigration work, these youth that were able to file for SIJ petition as a legal form of status under federal law could not petition for their parents. It was part of the legal requirement of the law. So if you were able to obtain legal status as an SIJ, you would not be able to ever petition for your mother or father, because it's part of the basis of receiving relief. So I think what we do for TPS people is one thing. What we do for Dreamers is pass the DREAM Act that's bipartisan and has support. And then with these 11 million undocumented immigrants, it's about actually talking about, immigration reform, which this country has talked about and Congress has actually never done anything. I think along all of this, it's also what are we doing to invest in border security? And we have a border patrol, and I believe in ensuring that our borders are protected, not just because of immigration, but because of trafficking of weapons and the trafficking of drugs, just as important. And it's about actually investing funds and resources in things that actually give results. And a wall is not the answer. I think, if you tell me, okay, we need to invest more in border security, there are current machines that are able to detect in a more clear way the ways that the new ways that they're trying to bring in drugs. Of course, let's invest in this technology. Well, we've seen a decline in Border Patrol agents because we're not able to retain them because they're not getting paid well. We need to invest more in that area. Great. I'm all about supporting things that are prudent, that make sense, and that actually bring solutions to the problems we face as a country.
But okay, so we get the new law, everybody's in. So now I got my cousin Guido, he comes from Italy. He flies in after your law is all set and everybody's in there, and he circumvents the process for 5 years. He didn't commit the crime and everything because he overstayed his visa. Now, someone finds out that he's in the country illegal, he's overstayed his visa. Do we deport him, or do we start building the same problem over again where people we gotta let them come in because they stayed here for 5 years even though he overstayed his visa? See, my problem is, when do we start enforcing the system, the new law that says, hey, wait a minute, you got to come through the proper channels to get into the United States to stay here? Or do we start all over again, developing this problem? We have another 11 million undocumented, and then we're going to pass another reform law to let them come in, which amounts to asylum, and then start over again. See, that's what.
And I think it's about asking the federal government to do their job, asking the Department of Homeland Security and USCIS to do their job. Everyone who comes here through a visa process, they have documentation of these people being here. They are aware of how long these people have visa eligibility for. If you know they're not here, do their job. That's not for us to figure out. That's for the federal government to actually follow through. These federal agencies that have the legal authority to do so under federal law to actually follow through and do it.
So why can't
and I'm not opposed to that.
So why can't they go after the people who've overstayed their visas now, whether they've committed a crime or not, and deport them?
No one's telling them they can't. They have the legal authority to do so. I think there's a difference when you've come 3 years ago and you've overstayed your visa, then you've been here for 30, 40 years. your family's here, you work here, you have no formal connection to your country of origin. So I think it's about circumstances, and we can't just convolute everyone into one group. I think we have to look at things for what they are and make sure we're assessing things correctly, and that what we're proposing actually makes sense to those sets of circumstances.
You should be a judge.
Okay, you've had the floor for a few minutes. Chris, do you have a question?
We've been asking all the candidates about the tax bill basically passed by Republicans with very little Democratic support that went into effect at the start of this year. What is your thought on that tax bill, and would you have supported it?
I would have not supported it. It gave a tax break to the 1%, to the biggest corporations at the expense of working class families that make up this 3rd district. I think what we should be focusing on is giving small businesses a tax break. Small businesses are the bloodstream of our economies. They stimulate our economies. They give employees access to meaningful employment. So I wouldn't have supported it. I think we need to be looking at taxing people their fair share, and that's not what this Republican administration did, and I think that's not the direction we should be moving in.
So I'm going to ask you not about that Republican, but about a fellow Democrat. Seth Moulton, congressman from a neighboring district, has been out campaigning for certain candidates for Congress, and he actually tried to put up a different candidate for the House minority leader against Nancy Pelosi. If you were elected, do you support efforts like that? Do you think Nancy Pelosi ought to be replaced as the leader of the Democrats in the House?
So I think that not just in our Massachusetts Democratic delegation, but even across this country, there are many Democrats that I admire for their work and their leadership. I think Nancy Pelosi is someone that I respect. She's a woman that's led on many progressive issues that have given constituents across this country access to resources they wouldn't otherwise have had. She's someone that's paved in the way for me. She's a trailblazer for women and allows me to be able to sit here before you today and say, hey, I'm a young Latina immigrant who is considering running and continuing to be a public servant for the 3rd district. I'm really concerned about what are the issues that my constituents in the 3rd district face when it comes to economic opportunity, when it comes to access to healthcare, when it comes to college affordability. I'm interested in finding solutions to these issues, and if given the opportunity to represent this district, I will make decisions about Democratic leadership when I get there.
Jeez, I thought you were going to go one way and then you had a curveball at the end there.
Representative, any thoughts on school safety and security in light of recent events in Parkland, Florida, and students and communities rallying for better safety? And I'm not just talking about gun control. We have some of the strictest laws in America. But what are your thoughts on school safety? What is going to happen here? I saw Jim Arcero filed a bill to bring back retirees and change some of the work exemptions that they could go into the school. But once again, that comes with a cost. Are we heading to where all schools have metal detectors? Just want to hear your thoughts and what some of the people are telling you on the campaign trail and what you might think about that.
Well, I think it's disgusting and disturbing that we've seen time and time again how gun violence is scarring community after community, and our members in Congress who are controlled by the NRA fail to do their job, and that's actually implement policy changes that address some of these issues we face. I think at the same time I've been a little bit inspired to see how many youth have actually come out. I know we had, March for Our Lives just last week. I've had youth come to my district office, my state house office every Wednesday advocating their calls, things that that I'm not used to because they haven't been engaged in this way. Postcards. So it's been inspiring to see their activism and their engagement when it comes to this topic. I think as a federal government, there's so much we could be doing right now and that we should have done years ago. Implement universal background checks when it comes to any sale of a weapon. Get, assault weapons banned, re-implement that federally. So there's a lot we could be doing right now that we're not doing. When it comes to school safety, no, I do not think that our teachers should have access to weapons in the classroom. I think that my colleague Arciero's new legislative proposal, which we talked about the other day in Chambers, is a great idea in terms of making sure that our school districts have access to safety in a way that doesn't cost us much. So I think it's an innovative idea, something that I would want to read more about to see how it would be implemented and if it makes sense. I think that in this country, there's such a high accessibility to weapons. I think that what we saw in Australia after the 1994 shooting, and then Australia revamping the entire way they address guns in their country, has been effective. And I think that as a country, we should consider that. I know that the Second Amendment was written at a time where it doesn't look like what we look like today. And I think we as a country should start thinking about how do we curtail access to weapons in the way we have now. You know, people would fight back and say, you know, I have access to my Second Amendment right, which says I have the right to bear arms. You know, the Second Amendment was written at a time where I was considered 3/5 of a person. So I think we should recognize that. We should recognize that, and we should be responsive to that. We haven't done enough. We need to do enough. And if given, you know, the opportunity to serve in this district, I will be unequivocal when it comes to this topic, because we've seen time and time again how we're losing victims and families are affected by gun violence, and we're not doing what we should be doing as a government.
Stay in the Second Amendment for a minute, Chris.
Yeah, I just want to ask quickly something I've been working on, started working on yesterday and figured I'd wait until today. I'm asking all the 3rd District candidates for their responses to an op-ed by former Supreme Court Justice Stevens, that was in the New York Times, a couple days ago, basically calling for the repeal of the Second Amendment. It was a pretty short op-ed. It couldn't have been more than 400 words, but this seems like a pretty decent segue point just to ask if you know, you agree with a call that significant to repeal the Second Amendment, or if you would instead disagree with that and suggest something in its place.
I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I've been talking about this on the campaign trail, about the fact that, you know, our Second Amendment was written in a different time where our country looked differently, we were at war, and we've evolved. And I think one of the issues that we currently see that no other developed country in this world sees is the high accessibility to weapons, the incident after incident after incident of a senseless gun violence. So I am someone who believes that we should figure out how we move away from people having such accessibility to guns. I don't know if the solution, and I would love to give this more thought, if the solution is completely repealing the Second Amendment or actually just reforming access to weapons. I think that it was written at a time that is not representative of today. And I think that we should take that into consideration as we move forward and figure out ways to get guns out of the hands of people. So it's not something I'm opposed to, but I'd love to think about what's the best mechanism to actually address what we're currently seeing. And I don't know if that necessarily is. It's something I would love to give more thought to. So,
with your experience with social work, and you talk about mental health issues, what is some way that Massachusetts and the country, okay, can do a better job in identifying these issues earlier in the home, and what might be one of the a common sense solution right now to better combat those issues.
All mental health issues, or particularly mental health issues
I'm
associated
talking
with...
more about youngsters. You talked about the importance of getting preschool education, and that would identify some of the issues with nutrition and everything else. But just I guess it's a broad question. But is mental health an issue? And some of the dealings that you've had in social work, I mean, where does that stem from? How does it, and how do we better, create solutions in that regard?
So I think mental health is a significant issue. It's a significant issue even with substance abuse users. I can tell you in my time as a social worker, I worked for a nonprofit called Children's Services of Roxbury. Their satellite office was in Tewksbury, so I spent time here in Lowell, in Lawrence, and Haverhill, and the majority of my children who were on my docket all had some form of a mental health issue, were seeing a therapist, a counselor, or on medication. So my agency contracted with DCF, and we provide what was called intensive foster care services. So these children had extremely abusive histories, and because of that, had high needs. So yes, I think mental health is a concern. I think depending on what population we're talking about, there's different ways of diagnosing it, it's different ways of bringing attention to it.
So let's talk about the young people and young teens.
So
we've even heard stories now that have been documented young girls, teenagers, have higher rates of depression than boys, and it stems a lot from peer pressure, cell phone usage where they're not getting out there anymore and doing things that kids used to do when they were in, and they're doing a lot on the cell phones and everything else. So are there success stories out there? I mean, what's the best way to success, and how can we replicate that? When you were working as a social worker, I'm sure you had some success stories. It's not all doom and gloom, right?
Yeah, social work, my experience in social work really cemented to me that you can make a positive impact in people's lives. All of my cases had traumatic history, sexual abuse, a lot of them on medication, and you as a social worker could really create what kind of pathway. It was going to be difficult. I mean, these are kids that faced so much turmoil, so much neglect and abuse. But it's about not giving up. It's about making sure that they're connected to the right services. So making sure that they are attending every weekly to their counselor or therapist appointment, making sure that you are somehow enriching access to enrichment programs after school, making sure that medically they're receiving the attention that they need. So it's in the schools, I think it's about also, I think we could revamp that. One of the bills that I worked on in the State House was my missing child bill. So you guys probably heard about this story in Lawrence last November. There was a child that went missing for about 3 weeks. The grandparents alleged neglect by the police department in terms of taking this case very seriously.
Right?
And the young child was found on the river 3 weeks later, beheaded and decapitated. And allegedly, I don't really want to get into specifics of the case, but a fellow student has been arrested and has been held for this crime. And allegedly, this is a fellow student that might have had mental health issues. So what mechanisms do we have in place in our public school systems to actually address this? Have the students in any way demonstrated something that should have grabbed the attention of our public school officials and administrators? And to be perfectly honest with you, I walked into, I was just in Lowell High. Wow. So many students, an incredibly diverse public school system. And it's, do we really equip our public school systems with the tools they need to get the job done? And I do not think we do. Do our students feel like they have, a social worker, not a social worker with 150 or 200 students who can't keep track of what they need to do? But it's, in that case, I feel like in the Lawrence case, here's this child who might have demonstrated, allegedly have no ability to determine whether this is a fact, mental health concerns. And was there a way for our system, whether it was the public school system, whether the parents, did they have access to it? Our wait lists in the state for mental health services are long. Are we investing enough resources in this? And I think it's a complicated issue, and I think it depends on what population we're talking about. Currently in the State House, there is an alleged bill that's being proposed by Representative Marjorie Decker that would put in place extreme protection orders. So if your family member knows that, hey, Jim is suffering from a mental health issue, I've seen him act out, he's currently, they've seen behavior time and time again, they would be able to go to a judge and get a extreme protection order in place, and that order would also prevent you from having access to purchasing a weapon. So I think it's when we talk about mental health and how we target it, depends on who we're talking about and what we implement in the schools. We're not doing enough. Even in Lawrence, we've seen some of our domestic violence issues. There was one occasion that person had mental health concerns and had demonstrated history of mental health concerns. Did that person actually have access to services? And I think we could be doing a lot more when it comes to that.
Very good.
Well, I'm all set.
I think I've gone
Chris,
through
you
my
all set?
list. Yes.
Camp, anything else?
No, very good. Appreciate it.
Oh no, thank you so much. Really appreciated talking to you guys and your questions and our dialogue.
Yes, we're going to be planning a couple of debates. We've got a couple of dates set up, one in Devens and one in Fitchburg.
Excellent.
And then we'll hopefully closer to the primary have one in Lowell. So we hope that you'll be getting an invitation.
Oh, she has.
The
campaign,
you did?
yes.
Oh, yeah,
I spoke with
Okay.
Samantha, I think.
She might not know, but these guys do.
Oh, they definitely know. They can control my
Look forward
calendar.
to seeing you again at the time, and wish you luck.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and looking forward to seeing you as this campaign develops, and I really appreciate it.